All right, what do we got here? Hutch talking about progressivism becoming toxic. What does he mean by that? I'm a little curious because Hutch, broadly speaking, is a person who will very often go after, and I think like safe to say can be broadly speaking fairly dishonestly will go after a lot of like progressive advocates who are trying to more aggressively push for a lot of differing sort of, I guess for like lack of a better term, like a progressive policy, and he will very often be like one of the like I don't know, like protest referees kind of in the room talking about like, well, that's not going to be effective because of me, and just like kind of like do that kind of a thing and just like get in the way of what could be like very very good like sort of progressive sort of like advocacy. So I'm very curious as to what he means here by how progressivism becomes toxic. Like, is it like a fucking Bernie bro kind of a shtick? Is that like the argument that we're gonna go with? Like, can we agree that there are a lot of like very annoying like Puritans, broadly speaking, amongst the left? You can make that argument, sure, but like I don't really fucking agree with like many of like the puritanism that like a lot of lefties sort of have, but like that's like a completely like different sort of story. The idea here that like I don't know, like progressivism is like being like sort of like broadly sort of toxic here because again, there tends to be more aggressive sort of advocates for particular positions. I think is very very silly because I think that's like the sort of position that he takes. But what do we have here? Perhaps we will see what he has to say here about like how progressivism becomes toxic.
Make space for stuff like white privilege. We should talk about that stuff, but we should make space for the possibility that like being a white guy doesn't mean that the problems just go away. And so like some people, and again, these are outliers. I'm not saying most people think this, but like there are outliers, sort of like toxic progressives that there's like no space for that. Okay, bro. So whoever said Latinx, now that is
Okay, so we're doing like the stupid misandry bit kind of a deal. Yeah, but generally speaking, okay, well, I mean, he does say that that is a minority of the population, but you're fucking like complaining about it, saying that like, yeah, this is like kind of a toxic behavior, right? Like, broadly speaking, most like left leaning people do not like the misandrist types, right? And a lot of misandrist types tend to be fucking turfs. Like, the vast majority of them tend to be like second wave liberal feminists, right? And I would even say like conservative fucking feminists, to be honest. I think you can also throw into that group as well. I don't give a fuck about the Latinx stuff, okay? I just say Hispanic because I don't like calling people who are, I don't know, Spanish people from like Latin America sort of Latin because I am Latin, technically speaking. That's like my argument that I have against it. So I don't even know why it's even called like Latin America because it was colonized by like Latin countries, so it was called Latin America kind of a deal. I prefer the term Central America because it's in the center of the American continent. That's what makes most sense to me, broadly speaking. I don't really like the term Latin in honestly or Latine or Latinx, Latino or Latina purely due to the fact that technically speaking, I can also be broadly described as Latino because I'm Romanian. That is a Latin based language. You can even say the same thing for French people, like Italian people, Portuguese, like all the fucking Latin based Romance languages. Does it kind of make sense why I'm like kind of saying here? Like, that's kind of the reason why I don't really like the term Latin, to be honest, because I think it's like too broad of a term. I don't think it's specific enough, right? Like that's my sort of problem here. I guess like a fair substitute would be like Romance language speakers, right? Like if we want to talk about like the more like Romanized like Latin speakers that exist throughout Europe, your Italians, Romanians, French people, Spanish people, Portuguese people, or you could just be like specific to the exact like nationality. That's like what I sort of like prefer, but that's more like a very nitpicky thing, to be honest. Like, I'm not gonna like shed a tear over people who use the terms like Latina or Latino or something, like, to be quite honest. Latin American, when first made, was popularized by French Canadians as a way to be like Hispanic America. We're in this together. That is an argument that I think makes a lot of sense to me because, again, yeah, I would throw in French Canadians as being Latin Americans because, again, France, Latin based language, French, Latin based language. I would also throw French Canadians into that umbrella. I think that makes a lot more sense. like in that particular instance, if I'm describing French Canadians or Mexicans or Salvadorans or whoever the fuck, like Hispanic people that live within America, I would probably describe that group as Latin American. That makes a ton of sense to me. It's mostly like a language nitpicky kind of a deal that I have specifically because I also fall under that category of Latin American. I am a Canadian citizen. I am a Romanian citizen. By all technicalities, I am a Latin American. That's not like hyperbolic to say, right?
That is the perfect example that I could give for toxic progressivism. Spanish is a gendered language. It's baked into the language. Are we just going to add an X to everything that ends in O or A? You're going to ungender a language that's thousands of years old, however old Spanish is? Good luck with that.
Who the fuck cares about that, dude? Like, what the fuck do you mean? Yeah, like, no, that's fucking stupid. Again, the only people who complain about that, it's such a fucking vocal minority. I don't even know if they're a vocal minority. Like, I don't give a fuck about any of that shit, right? Like, that's what we're complaining about? Really? Like a stupid, annoying. Is this still going to be the whole video? It's just going to be complaining about fucking woke scolds. All right, let's just keep going then.
What? Hutch doesn't identify as a moderate? No, I self-describe as a progressive. I'm still hanging on to that label. I won't let those motherfuckers take it away from me. I won't do it. They're not going to take it from me. I'm still hanging on to that one. I think the Democratic Party should be defined by progress. It should be defined by progressivism. It should be defined by moving forward. Whether that be at a slow pace at sometimes or a rapid pace at other times, we should be moving forward, not trying to protect and preserve our traditions at the expense of progress, which is like the whole reactionary philosophy. Prog. Wait, is that I love that.
Okay. Pragmatic progress. Of course he likes the fucking prod fucking thing. I know it's like the thing that Vaush used to say, but like I think like Vaush's pragmatism mostly comes out of sort of what is most efficacious politically at the time. Otherwise, like he's a full bloated leftist, but he understands that like a lot of the goals of leftism are not going to be realized while he's alive. So it's more about like, and this is like the sort of position that I also hold as well. I agree with this fucking position ultimately that he or not he but like that I think like it is way more important to sort of focus on the oncoming tide of fucking fascism and to do everything possible in order to stop that, because again, if the fascists end up being the ones who win out in the end, good luck having any more fucking progressive politics or liberal politics or any of that stuff. That shit's not gonna fucking fly anymore when the fucking fascist dictatorship happens. Like that's not gonna fucking happen, right? Like a lot of people who tend to sort of like identify with like prog or like progressivism, especially with like the arguments here, talk about how progressivism becomes toxic. First off, that's just like a lot of like fucking propaganda that's like pushed out by people to make progressivism look as bad as possible. I would be highly surprised if a lot of people sort of like go out and like complain to people about like, you're saying Latino and Latina instead of Latine or Latinx. Yeah, ungender the language. Most people don't fucking do that, okay? That's like such a tiny people who fucking do that kind of a shit. So like a lot of the people, like it's like a sort of like I don't know, almost like a quote unquote quote unquote like I don't know, not a why I left the left kind of a situation, because I don't think Hutch is on the. I think he's like a broad sort of like liberal progressive, I would say. It's very, very fucking lib for sure. And yeah, you're correct, Boy Meets Minnie. Yeah, it's always white leftists who say that, or annoying lib Karens. 1000 fucking %. Those are the motherfuckers that kind of tend to do that shit. Because again, I've had this take before, and I wholeheartedly agree with this fucking take. Stop fucking apologizing for a lot of shit that's happened in the past. You can't fucking do anything about it. Just like move on. Recognize and understand that you have that your ancestors, your people before, may have had a part to play in that, but don't fucking like hyperfixate and specifically like pander to like I don't know, like racialized minorities about that shit. They're gonna see that as like very, very preachy, not authentic, and just incredibly fucking annoying. And like people are just gonna be like, like you're just like you don't actually like believe in any of this stuff. Like that, don't fucking like come on, bro. Like don't do any of that bullshit. And like complaining about this stuff, I always find to be like particularly strange. It's just like it's such a like nah of an issue, to be honest. Where it's just like the only people who like make such a big fucking stink about that stuff are either like what are just fucking annoying ass white people online or like fucking Karens. And like fuck those people, they're dumb and annoying.
That's a good one. Is that a thing? That's that felt like home. Pragmatic progressive, that feels like home to me. I'm a radical pragmatist, that's what I would say. Like I think about feasibility and possibility more than I think about.
I don't like radical pragmatism. What the fuck does that mean? That's inherently oxymoronic, right? Like with radical pragmatist, to be radical is to be a person that fucking pushes the envelope significantly fucking forward, and to be pragmatic is to have like a sort of like basic understanding to be able to willing to be able to compromise. Radicals, broadly speaking, very often are not willing to compromise on like a lot of different stuff. Like I just don't agree with this. Like it's really really fucking strange. By the way, also be wary too of Hispanics that are too against gender neutrality in language. I've heard transphobes and racists be like, Latinx is white people colonizing our language. So be careful you're not playing into the hands of Hispanic right wingers. Oh, that's a very very good point there, Alex. 1,000 fucking percent. Yeah, like you also have to think about a lot of like right wingers who will adopt that fucking language very very often, right? This honestly sounds like the toxic empathy shit conservatives like Allie Beth Stuckey push. Oh yeah, for sure.
Individual policies, I guess. A radical, anti-radical. I'm not even against radicalism. It just depends on the moment, depends on the issue. Random hero with $2 progressives.
Again, like radical, these are oxymoronic sort of takes. Like again, to be a pragmatist is sort of like I was saying before. To be radical is to be someone who inherently pushes the envelope. To be a pragmatist is to not be someone who pushes that fucking envelope, right? Like to have like a sort of like base understanding within like reality and say like, oh yeah, I have to sort of like go along with like certain political wins in these issues because it's not going to be effective like otherwise or something, right? Like shit like that.
There are dozens of us. Dozens. Now, I think it's like a full third or maybe 40% of the party self-identifies as progressive, so I'm certainly not the only one. It's just that progressivism has taken a shot to the gut in the last like 5 years, and a lot of people associate progressivism with what they call wokeism, and so there's like a bit of a brand reputational hit.
Yeah, but that's like shit that conservatives are doing, right? Like what? What? That's what conservatives are doing. They do that fucking conflation all the fucking time. This is dishonest.
In the last like 5 years, but I refuse to shed the label. Classical progressive. I like that. That's a good. Yeah, I mean, I think that's fairly accurate. I would say. Like the
classical progressive.
Like when you hear
okay.
Like, it's literally impossible to be racist against a white person. I think most people hear that and they're like, well, that doesn't seem right. Obviously, there's a difference in anti-white racism versus anti-black racism. We should have a conversation about institutional hurdles and systemic problems. All that's valid, but the idea that you can never be racist against a white person just seems pretty counterintuitive when you think about it. I never experienced so many racial slurs in my life before I started sparring with lefties on Twitter. I got called white boy one time in my youth. One time. Okay. This kid named Wesley, forgot his last name. He was a real asshole. We were playing basketball. He was picking on me, and he called me white boy. And I was like, huh. Like, I wasn't even offended. I was just confused. I mean, it wasn't a slur.
I can't believe that. Can't believe that Hutch got called a white boy.
But it was, I mean, what else do you call that, right? Like, I was just confused. And that was the only time I never got called, like, the C word that I can't say on Twitter or Twitch. Never experienced any of that. And then
wait, is that like, are we talking about, like, with the like, sort of, like, vitriol in the tone or something? Like, I'm a little confused here by what's being said here.
I started sparring with like Hassan and Mike, and I have never, and it was a deluge of people hitting me with the slur. I was like, what the I don't know, what are some of the other progressive positions that have been adopted?
I mean, to be honest, like, okay, if we're talking about people like Mike from fucking PA, in terms of like annoying fucking, I don't know, Cracker Barrel ass motherfuckers who want to do the stupid like lib Karen bit, that's a motherfucker who will do the lib Karen bit all the fucking time. And is very fucking annoying about that shit, 1,000 fucking percent. But then again, we know like Mike from PA's fucking shtick in particular, and he's throwing in Hassan here because I don't know if like Hassan really does. Hassan's fans will do that for sure. Hassan himself, not so much. Like I don't think he really engages in that behavior all that much because I think Hassan, broadly speaking, understands like that's not really going to be conducive to like a broader political project, which I think Hassan is more interested in building a broader sort of political project. Mike from PA just wants to fucking clout shark off of Hassan and just like signal to people that he's a part of the fucking good boy club. Like that's Mike from PA. Mike from PA is not honest and is a complete fucking grifter and a charlatan, right? Like he'll just say and do anything to make sure that he's like within the good graces of the Hassan fan base when like Hassan is not fucking streaming, so he can like I don't know, be a Hasanabi fucking waiting room like effectively. Like that's Mike from PA's whole modus operandi.
Fringe wokeism. Erudite came onto the podcast like 3 weeks ago, and we were talking about like the challenges that young men face, and that got me thinking. That got me thinking about things a little bit differently. I thought she was making some pretty compelling points. When I look back on my life, there are certainly things about being a man who was raised in the era that I was raised in. There are certainly things that were really difficult for me, and I never really thought about it in that way until recently. Now, there's a different level.
I want everyone to keep in mind that Not So Erudite was like trying to offer It's like a bunch of President Sunday videos, and I think he like went too far with them to like a certain extent. But what is true is that she would offer like fucking therapy sessions for like 50 bucks an hour, despite the fact that she was not like an accredited sort of like therapist whatsoever. Hey, it's some of the fucking goofiest shit possible. And she like worked with like a bunch of like weirdo like Christian fucking organizations in the past to do like fucking therapy and shit like that. So it's just like, yeah, little sussy, just a little sussy.
Of problems. It's obvious that women face like so many hurdles still to this day. A lot of progress has been made. There are issues, political issues right now that are directly affecting women in a very profound way. Like if I want to get a vasectomy, I can just make an appointment, go to the doctor, and they'll do that shit. I think it might even be covered by insurance. Hang on, do I want a vasectomy? Am I still gonna? It's not federally mandated under the ACA to cover vasectomies, so coverage varies by plan. Okay. Because of an election 9 years ago, we now live in a country where a third of women live in a state where abortions are effectively banned, and some of them live in states where if you travel outside of the state to get an abortion, you can be prosecuted for that. So like, there's levels to it, right? There's levels to it. I'm the youngest boy in my family. I'm the only boy, 4 older sisters. I would say like very aware, as aware as I can be of the challenges that women face. And when I look back on like, there's still things to this day that I emotionally struggle with because I was raised in a time by a very stoic father who had and it wasn't just him, but like he was a very stoic, disciplinary kind of like a man's man. Like my dad was a man. Like my dad would walk in the room and he's just scanning, scanning for perps, looking at the exit strategy if he has it. Like he's just Vietnam veteran. He's just wired differently, like he is a man, like a Clint Eastwood man. He was enormous. My dad shrunk a little bit in his elderly years, but he's like 6'5". He had a voice that could make the whole house rumble, And there was just a set of expectations. I don't know about you guys, but like crying was discouraged for young men. And I think it's getting better. I think we're starting to see more people that are like open to stuff like therapy. And I think it is getting better for men. And then it's also getting worse in some areas because you have like the rise of super.
Is therapy getting like, are men sort of like becoming like going more and more to therapy to sort of like talk about that? I don't really know about that. I mean, maybe, right? Like, I think the conversation around getting therapy, I do agree with Hutch here that the sort of attitude around that is getting better. I don't really disagree with that whatsoever, because I do think that a lot of motherfuckers just need some fucking I probably need some fucking therapy or some shit, okay? I need a motherfucker to fucking talk to, okay? I don't really disagree with this particular point. Like, I do think like the sort of destigmatization, because again, what he's broadly talking to here is the stigmatization of people to go out and get help, right? Like, because of the 50s, suburbanization, the whole carification of the sort of like U.S. infrastructure, right, through suburbanization, loss of third places, has made it such that a lot of social isolation and alienation has become sort of like, well, more catalyzed. That's not ridiculous or hyperbolic to say, to be quite honest, right? Like, and there's a reason for this. It used to be back in the 20s and the 30s, a lot of employees would ride the exact same streetcars as their employers. And they would say certain things about their fucking employers. They would. The bourgeoisie understands, broadly speaking, here's the lefty, fucking cucked lefty bit here, okay? They understand that a lot of the strength that the proletariat, that the average worker has, is with social bonds of their class disposition, because again, class transcends race, ethnicity, gender, and religion. Class disposition transcends all of that stuff. So in order to be able to make it such that it is a much easier to sort of conquer and, well, divide and conquer and have these groups of fighting amongst one themselves, you must break those social bonds. Suburbanization was the first step. Social media was the next step. More and more so, now we're starting to see like this shit with like fucking AI companions. That is the next step. I made a video about this. I'll put it in the fucking description. It's called The Death of Sociability. The purpose of these fucking AI companions is to sort of make it such that people are further and further atomized, balkanized, and individualized such that they do not have social bonds with their fellow man, their community members, their neighbors. Which is why I say it is very good to go out there and talk with your fucking neighbors. If I have people that I'm running into in the fucking elevators, I strike up a small little talk with them. So like nothing too crazy. Say like, hey, what's up? How do you think the weather's going? It doesn't have to be anything complicated, okay? Like it's nothing too crazy. Like, anyone wants to like strike up a conversation, I strike up a conversation. I've had like good rapport with a lot of like my neighbors around, because like I don't know, I like to think of myself as like a somewhat well-adjusted like normal human being, right? And a lot of capitalists, and this is also something that was broadly speaking described within capitalist realism by Mark Fisher. We live in such a ridiculously hyper commodified time that everything, even aspects of life itself, are being commodified to a particular degree to serve a sort of very wealthy fucking elite at the top who want to sort of rake in more wealth and power amongst themselves. And the next step, and Mark Fisher died before he could probably broadly speaking talk about this. There's a reason why I say Mark Fisher would have a lot to say about AI companionship and the sort of death of sociability. I think the next step in terms of that sort of carving away of the final vestiges of the human experience in order for rich people to be able to have further and further and further control amongst themselves is going after people's ability to socialize with one another, to be sociable. And again, the AI companion stuff and social media is heavily, heavily playing into that stuff.
Toxic masculinity, like the rise of Andrew Tate, because men feel like they're being feminized, which is kind of ridiculous. But because I was raised in a time when crying was
What the fuck was that?
Crying was the only, which is kind of ridiculous.
Show a debate between Che Guevara and attached image. Okay.
But because I was raised
it's a fucking Tangia. Okay, never mind.
In a time when crying was the only acceptable way for young men to display their emotions when I was growing up was anger and aggression. That was more acceptable than crying, right? That was just a culturally reinforced thing. And that's too up, dude. That's too up. It sticks with you. You can go to therapy for the rest of your adult life, and you're still gonna be dealing with your mind forms these core memories, and the body remembers. And so you go your whole life you're still to this day when I get I get emotional sometimes. I'm older now, so I'm just more comfortable with it. I get emotional sometimes, especially watching movies. Anything to do with sisters or cancer, that'll get the emotions going for me. And I still my first instinct is to my body physically tenses up when I feel like I'm about to shed a tear. I physically tense up as if my body is physically pushing it down, which is not healthy. It's not healthy. That is not healthy.
I kind of agree with what Hutch is saying here, right? I don't disagree with this as well. I understand what he's saying here. I totally agree with this, 1,000 fucking %. I have the sort of exact same feeling here for sure. Because I also grew up during that exact same time. I had a lot of fucking anger issues as a kid. Trust me, if you think I have fucking anger issues now, oh boy. When I was younger, they were 10 times fucking worse. And I matured as a person, grew up, and it toned down significantly. Significantly, trust me. There's some stories that people can fucking tell you about this shit, so... Yeah, I don't it's not ridiculous to say that with the stuff I was talking about earlier with the death of sociability, that's the sort of main sort of I don't know a catalyst that has made it such that a lot of the patriarchal norms and standards that were broadly being pushed out because of suburbanization from the fucking 50s made it such that a lot of men, especially young men, since now they're not able to sort of obtain those sort of goals. And I've talked about this before because of the failures of the transitions of the economy from a more manufacturing based, the more tech service sector work, the complete utter failure of the United States to implement policy in order to be able to make those appropriate transitions made it such that a lot of men are going to be significantly more toxic and angry and not be able to sort of express their emotions, because a lot of those men don't fucking cry kind of a deal, boys don't fucking cry and don't show emotion, with a lot of the economic malaise that we currently find ourselves in, it's a compounding factor that has made that 10 times worse. And so it's the only way to sort of express these problems is going to be through anger and violence. I hope, broadly speaking, what I'm saying here is sort of being outlined here sort of decently here.
But that's just the reality. And so I go to therapy and I work on myself, and it's gotten better. Definitely gotten better. But this idea, I think that you shouldn't talk about men's issues at all. That's kind of a toxic progressivism. You guys know what I'm talking about. There's some people that are toxically progressive, where it's sit down. You're a cisgendered male. Okay. What problems?
That's a lot of second wave feminist stuff, right? That's the BuzzFeed feminism stuff that I think has mostly catalyzed that. I don't really know of a lot of for a bunch of more left-leaning women, I suppose it can be kind of tiring, but a bunch of them also they because they already kind of understand the sort of socioeconomic problems that a lot of general people sort of say. like more so the issue there is just like, well, this isn't just like a man issue, it's a sort of broader general issue in terms of like socioeconomic problems. And I think that's like a very often what a lot of people are broadly speaking to. The people who mostly do the stupid like misandry bit are just like a lot of like really annoying like liberal like feminist types. Those are the ones who do the sort of like I hate men kind of thing, or TERFs. TERFs do the I hate men thing all the fucking time, and they use that as a conflation to go after trans people with as well. Very, very common throughout that fucking propaganda. So it's not really that's not really toxic fucking progressivism. A lot of those people, I would argue, are conservatives.
Could you possibly have like that stuff? You know, like feminist. And I'm not saying this is the norm, right? But like some people take it to a toxic degree. I think most people that call themselves feminists or espouse feminism, I think most people obviously make space for improvement for young men. The people that I'm talking about are kind of outliers, but they kind of dominate a lot of the discussion. No, I'm realistic about this.
I don't. Do they really like? I agree they're a vocal lad minority. Do they dominate the discussion? Do they? I've not come across like any like these like the man hate fucking threads in like a long time. Like they were more prominent like think like 2 years ago, I think. Like 2-3 years ago, I'd say. Nowadays, not really. Like I hardly see like are they out there? I don't disagree with that, right? Like they're definitely out there, but prominent? I don't think so. Yeah, I would also say no as well, Alex.
Don't tell me this is a horribly online take. I have no illusions that this is the norm, but enough people have this view that it became kind of an issue. Like Eardite was talking about how young boys we're just more prone to aggression. That's just reality. We're more prone to anger and aggression, and there are biological reasons for this. You can have some people that break the mold on both ends of the spectrum, but that's just the reality. We're more predisposed to aggression. And she was saying that society is not doing a good enough job like making space for that aggression in kind of like a healthy way. Like there's a way to let out your aggression and express anger in a way that like doesn't hurt other people. Or theoretically there should be ways, and so we should explore that instead of like being like, no, don't do the thing, you know? But it's like
this is like the exact same stuff that like fucking conservatives say, right? Like I fail to sort of see where like society does not do a good job in letting out fucking aggression. Like I don't like in what way exactly, right? I asked this in like what's the evidence of this, right? Like okay, let's go with like a potential hypothetical. Let's say people are playing a game or something, and one kid is being rougher with the other kids and like is pushing people around, is being like a general sort of like belligerent sort of asshole. Should the teacher not step in to sort of like stop that, or like sort of like allow that to continue to happen, despite the fact that she knows or he knows that there will be complaints from parents about that when their kids talk to their parents about that particular issue? Like, right, like should that like, but that could be a sort of like genuine expression and letting out of that one kid's fucking aggression, right? Like there's a line to this, right? And maybe like Hutch would say like, well, obviously at that point, yeah, sure, but like, but well, that's the fucking problem here, right? Which is why I don't really like that talking point in particular, because it's dishonest, right? Like when conservatives bring that stuff up, because it's mostly conservatives who say that stuff, they are doing that as like a sort of way of like, men, you used to be a fucking asshole. It's time for you to continue to be an asshole and keep buying my fucking sort of like, I don't know, like LARP university course or some shit. Like, that's like the sort of like broader problem that I have with that sort of position.
It's like, so she got me thinking about that a little bit, which I thought was interesting. Alex, for $10, unfortunately, it seems to be the norm. White men have it so easy, so leftists feel like they can't complain about anything because everyone else has it worse. White men have it so easy. That's another thing too. It's like I think we can acknowledge institutional advantages that white men maybe have. Well, at the same time, like my life, I don't know about you guys, but when I look back on my life, I don't look at it like that was easy. You know, like there's a lot of pain, a lot of confusion, a lot of bad decisions, a lot of anger and incredible sadness. Like I don't feel.
Yeah, but every fucking lefty also agrees with that position as well. Again, like I'm failing to see how this is like being like progressives and like lefties being fucking toxic, right? Like I don't think so. I'm failing to see the argument here. Like a lot of lefties, broadly speaking, understand and sort of like talk about institutional advantages that a lot of like men have, broadly speaking. But do they say like it's all like a kind of a thing there or something? No, not really. Like a lot of like more intersectional people who do intersectional analysis also understand like yeah, men also have like a lot of problems here. Like I'm failing to see this.
Feel like my life was easy. You surely have benefited from white privilege. Of course. Oh, of course I have. I got pulled over. I don't know how much detail I can get into it because I'm on Twitch. This was years ago, at a low point in my life. I mean, very low, okay? I was making all kinds of bad decisions, and those bad decisions were cascading. Like, it was getting worse. And the volume of bad decisions and the seriousness of those bad decisions were commensurately getting worse. And I got pulled over in a situation where I should have gone to jail because of my bad decision that night. And miraculously, I didn't even know how. What year was this? 29? 99 times out of 100, I am going to jail on that particular night. And I got let off miraculously. I mean, my life would have changed after that. My actual life would have.
Like what? Was it like a DUI or something? Was he drunk driving? Under the influence or something? Crazy. I mean, that is white privilege right there for sure.
Changed. Now, would that same decision have been made by that police officer if the color of my skin was a different shade? I don't know. Maybe not though.
Probably not.
I don't reject the concept of white privilege, but I don't feel like my life was easy. You know, a lot of that was my own bad decisions. I'm not blaming the world or whatever, but I mean, I'm just saying, it's hard to be a human being. It's hard. This is the predicate for every major religion in the world. Why do you think religion exists? It's because to live is to suffer. Pain is unavoidable. Difficulties are unavoidable. I don't care who you are. It's hard to be a human being. Consciousness is what's that line in True Detective about?
I mean, unless you're rich and you have a lot of like power, like a lot of concerns seemingly get more curtailed. I would say significantly, but you know.
Consciousness. I'm gonna go full Russ Cole on you guys here. I think human consciousness is a tragic misstep in evolution. We became too self-aware. That is a slogan that applies to my life various times. I'm bipolar. Okay, I'm bipolar. That shit is real. I'm bipolar type 2. I was born with the unbelievable luck to have a mental illness that has the highest rate of unaliving. We are just depressed, constantly depressed, catastrophically depressed. So when I look back on that shit was not easy. You know, it got a lot easier after I got a diagnosis and actually got on medication. Life changed. But pre-medicated Hutch was just bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. And I used substances to self-medicate because that was the only thing that gave me relief was drinking a bunch of whiskey. Made me feel a little bit less, you know, that shit was not easy, you know. So, you know, we gotta make space for stuff like white privilege. We should talk about that stuff, but we should make space for the possibility that like being a white guy doesn't mean that your problems just go away. And so like some people, and again, these are outliers. I'm not saying most people think this, but like there are outliers, sort of like toxic progressives that there's like no space for that. Latinx, okay, bro. So whoever said Latinx, now that is the perfect example that I could give for.
I'm still failing to see like again how this is like the monikers of like toxic progressivism, right? Like I don't think I really agree with this, right? Like, can some people be annoying about this? Sure, but like I'm failing to see why this is like really a big deal that needs to be sort of like fixated on, right? Because like most lefties would agree with what you're saying here, right? Like I'm a lefty and I'm like, well, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I don't disagree with this, right? Like some of the, like, I agree that there's a very loud minority who tend to be very fucking annoying about these particular things. And I've already explained my whole shtick about like Latinx and shit, like why I do not like the term Latin whatsoever. And it's just like, the problem that I'm mostly having here, I think, with what Hutch is saying here is I think he might be generalizing a little too much.
Toxic progressivism. Latinx is crazy. That is crazy. It's like 95% of Latinos don't like that phrase. And you still see it in like an academic setting. It's crazy, man. It's just, it violates the whole...
Yeah, but that's a fucking academic setting. That's a little bit different, right? Like, if we're talking about sort of like the world of academia, that's like a completely different like sort of strata of like knowledge and people sort of talking. And I don't even know like what is the prominence of like people talking about that, like the use of like Latinx. I feel like, am I getting like the vibe that this is like another birthing person kind of a deal, where it's like there's like medical reasons for as to why people use the term birthing person? Because that's like the kind of vibe that I'm getting here, to be honest, where it's just like, yeah, again, that's like, I personally would prefer to defer to the authority here. Just talk about like, well, there's reasons why they're using that term in particular to talk about certain things, because it has like applications in certain like certain very specific like aspects. And I don't think that's like really ridiculous to say and to do. It's just like it's really weird. Have you heard the term amerindian? That's a very academia term that I've never heard anyone IRL use, but historians use a ton. Well, yeah, exactly. Like, there's a ton of, like, super nerdy academic terms that are just used. Like, so, it's again, like I've said before, it's a different sort of strata where, like, people are having, like, debates about certain things. And it's, like, the same thing that I've said before with, like, Gamergate with Anita Sarkeesian, right? Same fucking argument when I did my whole attack on Gamergate arc, right? That's a fucking throwback. a lot of like what Anita Sarkeesian was saying was like accurate. Like, yeah, what she's saying is not wrong or ridiculous. She's correct here, but again, that's just like a sort of like discussion that left the chamber that it was being talked about, where it was not broadly speaking meant for sort of general sort of use. I think sort of the same thing with like Latinx and stuff like that. It left the chamber that it was meant to be used in, right? More like academic settings and stuff like that. Maybe like more sort of like progressive, like lefty type places. And like a lot of people misappropriated that stuff. Like mostly specifically annoying fucking white people who misappropriated this sort of language and is trying to use that as like a cudgel to sort of like signal to groups. Because again, for a lot of white people, what they fundamentally care mostly about is signaling their allegiance to particular sort of groups to try to, like, I don't know, overcompensate for what they believe are their own sort of like inadequacies or whatever. Like, that's why they fucking do it. And it's preachy, it's annoying. A lot of people don't fucking like it. And broadly speaking, everyone sort of acknowledges that it's just like very stupid and fucking annoying behavior that a lot of like annoying ass white people generally tend to do.
Oh, Spanish is a gendered language. There's no, it's baked into the language. Are we just going to add an X to everything that ends in O or A? You're going to ungender a language that's thousands of years old, however old Spanish is? Good luck with that. I mean, I don't even know if this is necessarily restricted to like toxic progressivism, but I mean, we're also kind of delving into cringe lib territory. Like, I feel like you can find a lot of cringe lib types that use Latinx.
Okay, good that he's actually saying this, right? It's because I think that's honestly that's most of the people that are using it, mostly cringe lib types. Not really like that many lefties. Like there's like, okay, I mean, if you want to use that particular term, that's fine. I don't have a problem accommodating to that. And it's really is it's just that fucking simple. I don't know why we're sort of like trying to generalize about how this is like turning progressivism toxic or something. Like that's like that's the problem that I'm mostly having here.
Here's someone in my chat is saying that plenty of people use Latinx in California. I mean, I'm sure by the numbers that's true. California's a big state. Yeah, but it's specifically cringe libs trying to co-opt progressive aesthetics. I mean, I do. Yeah, I think some of it is that. Maybe even a great deal of that. I mean, I'm not immune.
That's a very, very good, very, very, very good fucking goddamn point that was being raised up in the chat. It's mostly just a bunch of cringe libs who are trying to fucking overcompensate for whatever perceived inadequacies they think they have. That's it. Like, to be honest.
Immune to it either, you know, like, certainly wasn't immune to it in 2020 at the height of this kind of stuff, right? But, you know, to be alive is to suffer. I mean, that's like a basic, like, Buddhist tenet, like the foundation of Buddhism. They call it samsara. You know, you're on that, you're hamster on the wheel, bro. And they're right about that, you know. They're right about that. So I think people need to, we should focus on institutional hurdles or other ways that we can make progress. There's still a lot of ways that we can improve racially or along gender lines. And at the same time, I think we need to also just remember that everybody's a human being and everybody's suffering. I mean, that's difficult when you try to apply it to, like, rabid MAGA people. But I think it's a good principle. I think the problem I have with this comparison is that it's trying to compare statistical level issues between gender, race, and personal problems. I'm saying we need to compartmentalize these things. You shouldn't focus on one thing at the absolute detriment of the other thing. So you shouldn't focus on your own problems so much so that you just ignore these institutional problems, and you should not exclusively focus on the institutional problems. And it leads you to discounting the universal condition of suffering that every human being experiences. Yeah. So anyways, you know, those are just a few things that I would call like toxically progressive. But I still would call myself a progressive. But it's just I touched on this and then I kind of moved away from it. Like, I'm not thinking about policy right now, guys. I'm sorry, but I'm just not. I'm not thinking about Medicare for all. I'm not thinking about that shit right now because we got a way bigger problem right now. Like, that has to take priority. The Donald Trump movement, MAGA, the new incarnation of the Republican Party, that has to be front and center. We have to make sure that they lose. The consequences of them winning more are getting worse and worse. It's getting worse. It's getting so much worse. Does anybody disagree that the second Trump term has been like 10 times worse than the first term? It's getting so much worse. So that has to be the priority. And so it's like recognizing the threat of Trump and focusing on coalition building. That's like first. And then after that, it's like we can think about these other policies, which I want to do, but those have to kind of take a backseat for a second.
Yeah, but okay, the problem that I broadly speaking have, like, okay, I don't disagree with what Hutch is saying here, but very often he'll, like, set that very much so on the back burner in order to go after people who are more lefty progressive than him, more on the left than him, and try to get in the way of their goals and objectives as well, which is what's going to cause fucking tension, right? Like, for example, didn't Hutch agree with, like, I don't know if he agreed with, like, a lot of what ContraPoints is sort of, like, Reddit posts, but on, like, sort of, like, Israel-Palestine. Like, this is why people, broadly speaking, think that you're a bit of a fucking lib, my dude, and that not, like, really a progressive, because every progressive acknowledges that, like, what Israel is doing in Gaza is abhorrent, and, yeah, you know, Benjamin Netanyahu, people like him should be tried at the fucking Hague, to be quite honest. And that's not like ridiculous or hyperbolic, but you tend to sort of like get into fights with people online. Not really like the people, like the Zionists who are pushing for the fucking genocide, but more so seemingly with a lot of the fucking lefties. Now, I could be wrong, and that may be the only things that I'm seeing in particular in my sort of like feed and timeline, and that might be feeding into that. But you tend to get sort of in the way of like the more radical people again. And there's a reason why a lot of the more sort of like pragmatic people need to have radicals who are willing to push the envelope, right? The radicals push the fucking envelope, while more pragmatic people can help sort of like compromise, even though you overall agree with the things that more radical people sort of like are pushing for. So again, which is why I kind of say like the, I don't know, pragmatic progressive sort of stuff I think is stupid, right? It's oxymoronic, right? Like, to be a radical is someone who fundamentally has to push the envelope, right? I would say myself as someone who is a radical in terms of the things that I truly fucking believe in and the things that I would like to see be brought out into the world. But I base a lot of the stuff within reality. I can understand and like know like when it becomes like sort of like necessary to compromise. But I'm going to keep pushing further and further and keep trying to attempt to push the envelope, right? And to keep, I don't know, pushing forward, constantly forward as much as possible, because like that's what's most important here. Like, the arc of time shall never stop, it will always keep going forward, right? Kind of a deal. And to quote Sam Cedar quoting Mal, let 100 flowers bloom strategy. Exactly, 1000%. So again, that's like the broadly speaking, the problem that people have with you specifically, Hutch. You seemingly like to get in the way of a lot of people who want to push the envelope further and further and further by being like, well, wait, hold on, we can't like really focus on that. We need to like sort of more focus on like all this other stuff. When like broadly speaking, like everyone like within the like people who are radicals would totally agree with that and be like, yeah, of course, like just you're trying to get in the way of stuff that I'm trying to do as well. So I am going to have problems with that. Which is the exact same thing Hassan says, right? Like, and I wholeheartedly agree with Hassan's position on that. It's like, dog, if you're going to get in the way of the stuff that I'm trying to do, I'm going to have a fucking problem with that. And like he's even said before, that he gets into fights with people like Hassan constantly, right? Who are trying to push the fucking envelope as much as he can in terms of his political project, right? That's why, for example, like, on my fucking channel, I don't tend to go after liberals all that much, to be honest. Unless they get in the way of like goals I have, or I think there are things that are ostensibly critical. But very often, a lot of progressive liberals, a lot of like more social democrat types, I don't tend to go after them. Hardly, if ever. Because I understand that they aren't a necessary piece. And overall, they probably agree with a lot of the stuff that I have. I can find a lot more rapport with them, so long as they don't get in the way of the stuff that I'm trying to push for. And generally speaking, a lot of them tend not to, quite honestly. Because they also understand it's just like, it's a symbiotic relationship. You need the radicals to push things further and further and further in order to be able to have a lot more of those like sort of pragmatic good policies in order to be able to push forward. That's how you got the weekend. That's how you got the 40-day work week. People fucking fought and died for those things, right? Back during the fucking late 1800s, early 1900s, right? Like, that's how it works. You need the fucking radicals if you want to be even able to think about pushing for those more sort of like comfortable positions.
If you can do them, if there's an opportunity to do them at the local level, state level, or national level at some point, pounce on the opportunity and actually do something with the power that you have. But we have to make sure that they stop getting power. We have to. It's so bad. It's so goddamn bad. Because we are down bad as a country right now. It's so fucking bad. Vote blue no matter who. You're using that as a pejorative, or you're using that as like a negative thing. But what if we reframed that entirely? Okay. What if we framed it as, let's team up. We can't lose if we work together. That's how I'm gonna reframe it. Instead of blue no matter who, I'm gonna say we can't lose if we work together. That's what it means. So if somebody way to my left gets nominated to represent my district in Congress, I'm gonna vote for that person. That's the blue guy. That's the blue guy. And if you live in a district where someone to your right is nominated to be your nominee,
yeah, but the problem is that if like the more radicals are trying to like, it's like the same thing I've been pushing for before. Like, a lot more radical sort of advocates are going to push for the person who is further to the left, and people like you are going to get in the way with that. So there's going to be tensions there, right? That's the main problem. Hutch, the main sort of thing here is that like you're the guy who keeps getting in the way of the radicals trying to do their thing, right? Dems need to stop throwing anyone progressive or left under the bus. Establishment is the problem to begin with. That's a very good point as well, Boy Meets Mini, right? Like, the establishment Democrats, we all know what they're trying to do with Zoran Mamdani. They're trying to snub him as much as possible. Like, that's not, like, ridiculous or hyperbolic to say, to be honest. Like that's why, generally speaking, a lot of people have problems with, like, establishment fucking liberals.
Then you vote for that blue guy. Vote blue no matter who is unironically the best prescriptive solution available right now. But the lefties don't like it because it's like they feel like they have to shit on their own principles to do that, and it just pisses them off. So why don't we...
Oh, see, so I was correct in saying that Hutch did agree with ContraPoints' fucking post on Israel Palestine. Again, this is perfectly emblematic of the fucking stuff that I was saying. He's just getting in the way of stuff that more progressive, radical people are trying to push for, and that's why people have problems with him. So yeah, a lot of this, I think, is going to, broadly speaking, I think, ring very, very hollow coming from Hutch. So Hutch, I don't disagree with this, right? If you want to be the more pragmatic person in the room, do not get in the way of the radical stuff that I would prefer to push for, the pushing of the envelope that a lot of radical people are sort of pushing for, and stop trying to say that that's how progressivism becomes toxic, because this is the reason why people think you're like a fucking centrist lib, because you, generally speaking, want to sort of get in the way of a lot of what more radical people want to push for and want to do. That is the fucking problem here. That's the fucking through line. But yeah, broadly speaking, with a lot of the concepts I've been speaking about before, it's the sort of idea that a lot of, like, more moderate types and, like, liberal types, broadly speaking, want to get in the way as much as possible of the people who are trying to push for more radical sort of things, right? Like, you push the envelope as much as possible. You keep pushing. You have to keep pushing. That way, eventually, you are forced to drag people over. In 20, like, perfect example just for you, Hutch, okay, buddy? I know you're probably never going to see this, but, you know, if you do see this, perfect fucking example. Why was everyone talking about Medicare for all during the Democratic primary debates? Because the radicals and Bernie Sanders were pushing that throughout the media so much, forcing people to have to talk about it. That is the point. Force people to have to talk about these more sort of, like, radical positions. And so it sort of, like, brings the overall conversation more and more to the left. That is the point. So just being the guy who says, like, well, you know, I'm just gonna, like, actively shit on this stuff and try to get in the way of the work of the fucking radicals is what's going to fucking cause tension there, right? Like, broadly speaking, there's a reason why it is accurate from, I don't know, a lot of lefties when they just call you, like, you know, an annoying, like, fucking white moderate for as to how sort of, like, a Martin Luther King would fucking goddamn describe it. Because I do think, again, this is some, like, real white moderate behavior type stuff. Oh yeah, 1000% Boy Meets Mini. Like, you know, I don't mind radical positions, but they're wrong kind of a deal. But I think it's kind of worse with Hutch because you'll actively fight with people who are holding those fucking radical positions, right? Who are trying to push further and that envelope further and further and further, right? That is the problem that a lot of people have with people like Hutch. Martin Luther King Jr. himself perfectly described it within the letter to from Birmingham jail. The consequences, the problem of the white moderate, because what Hutch is describing here, this is some real fucking white moderate fucking shit. Don't think there's really much else to say besides that.